Well, the author and Occupy came up with the same decision: walk away from debt. Our 15 Minutes of Fact today will deal with the month of September 2010 when two births occurred. Occupy Wall Street, we're all familiar with that. Not quite as familiar with a book titled Walk Away from Debt. It's amazing how synchronicity works, wouldn't you say? Well, we're fortunate by way of synchronicity, having run across this fellow, to have on the phone with us today Nicholas Carroll. He's the author of that book and someone who has a special affinity with the Occupy movement and its fight against debt in all its forms. Nicholas' previous books, they include Dancing with Lawyers, Fighting Slander, Layoff Survival Plan, Walk Away from Credit Card Debt. He's been a writer for the Chicago Tribune, the Times of London. He's a syndicated columnist and contributes a blog to the Huffington Post. We're honored to have him. Welcome to the show today, Nicholas.
Thank you. It's good to be on, Jerry.
Well, I'm happy to have you here. So we might as well hit the hot spot with Occupy, which is most recently manifestation has been Rolling Jubilee. So what's your first take on that?
I was wildly excited when I read about that last week. My immediate reaction was, this is gracious, this is brilliant. Buying the debt and just pouring it down the sewer, I said, this is money going back to Main Street. And it's something I've been waiting for a long time. I've interviewed many people at Occupy movements, and mainly covering San Francisco and Oakland. And there were no dummies there. They knew what they were doing, but they were protesting. And I was waiting for action. And on the 15th, in your column in Huffington Post, that's where I first saw it. I said, they're moving, they're doing something direct and effective to cut off the spigot of money to Wall Street.
Well, you seem to be a big fan of that. Tell me about your books first. Did you notice that you had published Walk Away from Debt in the same month that Occupy came into existence?
I did. Mm-hmm. And that's where I got interested in Occupy. But again, we were on different tracks. Until last week, there wasn't a whole lot of convergence between what we were doing. Occupy was protesting, and I was out there in the field trying to get Americans to stop paying the monthly credit card debts and walk away from severely underwater houses. And so I was very focused on stop the money going to Wall Street, keep it in the local community. And then that converged last week when suddenly Occupy was taking action, doing the same thing. So
what would you say that you have in common with Occupy at this moment?
Action. This is protests. I look back to a time when I can barely remember protests, Vietnam, but protests worked. But on the other hand, protests had something else going for them. We were losing a war. And it was on the front page of the papers every day. And this time around, Occupy just didn't have that leverage from outside. It's kind of harsh, but Vietnam, people were seeing the body bags being unloaded right there on camera. And the wars in the Middle East just haven't had that dramatic effect. The fallout in the end will be the same. Hundreds of thousands of ravaged vets with psychological problems that'll haunt them all their life, but it's not up in your face like Vietnam was. And so I just thought the protests themselves, and then it seemed to die out in spring. We thought Occupy was gone maybe, and then all of a sudden, wow, people behind the scenes have been thinking, now they're acting.
Well, it's interesting you should mention the impact of the Vietnam War. Certainly that was at my time as well. And when we were out in the streets protesting, we knew exactly what we were protesting, and those were the body bags. Here, there weren't body bags. There were foreclosed homes. There were people driven into deeper and deeper debt until they defaulted and end up on the street. So there's no blood involved. It's a bloodless war that's being perpetrated right now.
Very well described, and not covered still by the American mainstream press. If you want to see stories on sewer life, storm drain life in Las Vegas, there's a whole culture under Las Vegas now of homeless people, and you read the London Daily Mirror to get your story.
Well, you mentioned that there was a financial criminality that caused a Great Recession, and the focus that you've had in your books has been to draw that to people's attention, just as Occupy has been drawing that to people's attention. What has been your luck or fortune, if any, in getting people to wake up?
Dismal at first. It was hopeless. In early 2009, the only acceptable reason to the average American to walk away from debt was medical bankruptcy. I just couldn't get people to do it. They would come back to, the publisher told me they would come back to the website for 6 months, 8 months, the same people as far as they could tell, and then finally decide to buy the book. And then I found out if I could go on radio, or better yet, get in front of an audience, the callers would realize, hey, I'm not a deadbeat. There are other people just like me with the same problem, and then they would move. But I want people to, if you can't pay the mortgage, then stay in the house for the 2 years, or what they call free rent. And people worry about they were worrying about the deadbeat label, but let me tell you that the deadbeats, the yuppies we love to hate, the rich, they were gone in 2008. They quit paying and split. And so anybody out there now who's agonizing over paying debt, believe me, you're not a deadbeat. You're a real latecomer. It's time to move, and the stigma is gone too.
Well, it's in my background, having worked in the collections industry, guilt and embarrassment were unacknowledged tools that the collector would use when calling somebody and causing them to pay up.
Absolutely.
They wanted to shame these people. They wanted them to feel embarrassed. They wanted them to feel less than. And Occupy stood up and said, nonsense, you are not a loan. You're not a cipher. You're not a number on a piece of paper that someone is trying to collect on. You're a human being and deserve respect for that. So I would say that my guess is you certainly feel in step with Occupy.
I felt tremendously in step with them when I started covering the rallies and writing it up in Huffington Post, because the people I was meeting there, they'd have these little libraries, and these libraries were not put out for the benefit of the press. They were stuffed between a couple of tents. So I pulled them out, and what am I finding? Adam Smith, Max Weber on bureaucracy, the Wealth of Nations, all kinds of heavy reading. And then talking to them, also it was the palette of people there. I was photographing in San Francisco down on Market Street, 15 minutes before the cops were due and they were going to run them out. A bunch of people in their 60s and 70s were carefully sweeping up the street, including the leaves. I went, these are bums? I mean, come on. These are quality people.
Well, you and I, you've been in mainstream media. You've written for some of the largest papers. You've been interviewed on radio and KGO. You know what it's like when a movement is ignored by the press. So what in the world can either you do about it, or what can we do about it to eliminate this nonsense that they do write, the dirty hippies or the people that can't find a job?
Well, radio, of course, is the great uncensored medium that sort of punches a hole through the mainstream press. The blogosphere has some effect, but I mean, come on. You keep repeating it in the front of the New York Times and Fox News, sometimes the same story, even though they're supposedly opposite poles. And enough repetitions, people buy it. So radio is one. The other one I'm making a big push towards. I started this year, and I practically would like to be on the road all of 2013, is just getting in front of audiences. Because if I could get in front of 100 people, it's incredibly exhilarating. I don't think it's that I'm such a great public speaker. They come and they look around the room and they go, well, all these people in trouble, they don't look like bums. They're deadbeats. They look like me. And they go home and then they do it. And so if I could speak to 100 people conservatively, that's $1 million that's not going to Wall Street. Instead, it's going back into the local economy. Well,
you were quoted in USA Today to the effect that money not sent to Wall Street is an economic boost to Main Street. Could you elaborate on that?
That was their senior economic reporter. I couldn't believe it. He called me out of the blue. And I went to the business section the next day to look for the story. Couldn't find it. Was disappointed that I'd been dropped. Then I turned to A1 and I went, whoa, I'm the lead. And,
it's nice to be noticed, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that was, you know, USA Today, people go, oh, well, that's USA Today. And then they go, you made the front page with that quote?
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And I credit that guy with being pretty bold.
Well, let's talk about how you're getting your message out. And obviously, your book, and by the way, I want to refer our listeners to your website, walkawayfromdebt.com. Since it covers all kinds of debt, from mortgages to credit cards and loans, medical bills, even student loans, what other things have you written that have addressed this, and why should they be read?
Well, the layoff survival plan is still viable. It didn't succeed in the market because people were not. That was 2008, 2009 when I released that, and people just weren't reading. The writing was right in front of them on the wall. This isn't your normal recession. This is the big one. But everybody was going, oh, I won't lose my job. The bullet has somebody else's name on it. And that turned out not to be true, as you know, the rolling layoffs kept happening. And so that was layoff survival plan is still applicable. It was written for the Great Recession. It's not your normal. I went home and I cried, you know, and then I got another job in 2 months.
You
have another job.
Well, you also wrote about credit card debt.
Credit card debt, because that's the most recent book. A lot of people were the focus has been on underwater homes, which by any reckoning there's a maximum of about 16 million out there, but a lot of them are not underwater far enough to walk away from. But credit card debt, I can't find any figures on it, but can we realistically estimate from talking to our friends that less than 50 million Americans are deeply in credit card debt? I don't think so. And so I said, well, you know, the housing bubble was bound to burst, and his friends in Canadian finance who watch us in horror were going, well, the credit card bubble is next. And they said, okay, well, let's deal with this. Let's turn off that spigot to Wall Street. And credit card debt, of course, is the easiest one to walk away from. You don't have the anguish of moving. People ask me, how long does it take to turn around your financial situation by walking away from credit card debt? And I go, well, if you were going to write the check today, it takes about 1 minute. Don't.
Well, I wouldn't be a very good host if I didn't ask you where these books are available.
Well, both of them are available on the walkawayfromdebt.com website. Walk Away from Credit Card Debt is also available on Amazon. Walk Away from Debt for a Better Future, the full range book that covers all types of debt, is only on the walkawayfromdebt.website and .com website, and that's because I'm constantly revising it. I've written books and they're still true 20 years later. This one I'm rewriting every month, sometimes every week. I thought I was just going to write it and hand it to the publisher. They thought they were going to print it, and they found out there's no way it'll ever be in print. It'll always be an e-book because I write something down, and 3 months later it's dead wrong. That's why the publisher provides free updates to anybody who buys from them.
Well, you said something of interest to me early on. You out there, of course, way out there in California, away from here in New York City, where I'm occupied with Occupy. We went into a winter, and people didn't hear much from us. The only way that Occupy would ever get on the front page is if there were beatings or police involved. And we got rather tired of that. And you're right about one thing. We took advantage of that time to start working together in many different factions, addressing different forms of the complaints that we had about Wall Street, about big business and bad government. And what has happened, we've had our own form of autumn harvest in creating, and now moving into winter, in creating the Occupy Sandy, which is where Occupy outdid and outsprinted the Red Cross and FEMA to be out there to help people. That certainly got us some good press. And of course, Rolling Jubilee, which is now gathered in over $350,000 worth of contributions to take the weight off of individuals who owe money. That's gotten some good press, as well as some criticism. So what would you criticize in your own gentle fashion, I know, but what would you say you'd like to see more of in Occupy?
Both of those are stellar. Helping out in Sandy was great. I mean, that sort of fleshes out what Occupy is. It's not just, we're not here just to complain. We're working for the people, by the people. And there's, I guess, where's the last time we heard the word solidarnosc? But that's kind of a feeling it has to it now, that it's, we'll divert from protesting and go help people who are hurt by Sandy. And so I think that adds humanity, compassion, gravitas.
Well, I think it's also instructive to not only the general public, but also to people in Occupy operations and Occupy cities around the country.
Yeah, some people are still stuck in the Occupy mold in some cities, and that's, camping is the thing. And I think that presence it's good to, when I walk by the Federal Reserve in Market Street in San Francisco, I am pleased that the tents are gone, but there's always somebody there with the tables, with the leaflets.
Well, I'll be happy when they legalize free speech, won't you?
Well, San Francisco was comical. Oakland's more confrontational. But yeah. San Francisco, by the time I noticed the day they were evicting them for 2 days and they were back, the security guards outside the Federal Reserve, by the time they saw people sweeping up not only the garbage they had thrown on the ground, but the leaves around the trees, the security guards had a whole new attitude and were going like, well, hey, started talking amiably to the protesters.
Well, it must be ironic for out here in New York City, for members of the New York City Police Department who have been less than gentle with occupiers, to see them out in their neighborhoods cleaning up after Sandy, helping their families, and they're not being kettled out there. There are no truncheons out there. Why is that, I wonder?
Well, police have their own problems. I spend part of my time in Stockton, California, foreclosure capital of America, and police are being laid off. I mean, they just, reduction in force, they wiped 20% of the cops off the payroll.
The amazing thing is that with Occupy here, we've attempted to have conversations with the police regarding the fact that they're part of the 99%, and why in the world are they enforcing the 1%'s say over things? So it's a difficult conversation. You do what you're paid to do, but at the same time, there's a moral prescription that has to be in place someplace.
Well, and the moral is, the morality is the thing. I finally looked up the word morality. I said, I think I need to know what it means. And so I looked up the roots of the word, the etymology. And morality just doesn't rank with duty towards a family or a drowning child at all. It's not in the same ballpark. Morality, from Latin through French through medieval English, means proper behavior in your place and time. And so people are still living under the morality that existed back around 1970. But 1977, that was when the caps on interest rates rose in all 50 states from 9% to unlimited, 29%. And then the Reagan years started, the layoffs started, labor protection stopped, and we had the go-go 80s, which was the bonfire of the vanities on Wall Street. I mean, basically from the recession of 73, the ball was in motion, and the rich were starting to rip off the middle class. And we had a deal that Henry Ford made when he doubled worker salaries so they could buy my car. The rich went along. They called him a socialist. They called him a pinko, a communist, whatever. And well, they weren't calling him communist in 1914. But when
the same general idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when they saw Henry Ford was making money hand over fist by selling his workers' cars, they said, "Wow! By letting the middle class exist, we can make even more money." And that was a covenant that lasted until 77. And so, I mean, now I've had the greatest trouble getting people explaining to people. When I finally started pointing out that tact, that's when I found audiences were moving, that immorality is a changing target. It's not the same in every society, in every place. It's not duty.
Well, you have been a delightful conversationalist, Nicholas. I appreciate this very much. We're going to have to complete our 15 minutes, which obviously stretches whenever I find somebody as interesting as you, to a little bit more than 15 minutes, in fact. I hope that our radio audience is enjoying this. Is there one last thing you'd like to say before I close out the show?
I would like to hear from anybody who wants me to speak to audiences. Mainly I've been doing California and Nevada so far, but my ears are open, nonprofits, local business organizations. Somebody wants to put me on stage, my publisher will work with you and for you.
That is hopefully following on receptive ears. This is Jerry Ashton with 15 Minutes of Fact, thanking everybody for listening in. And for those of you wishing to know more about the book and about Nicholas Carroll, you can go to walkawayfromdebt.com. You can write him at Nicholas Carroll, that's 2 L's and 2 R's, at walkawayfromdebt.com. He's also on Facebook as walkawayfromdebt.com, and Twitter is at writer Nicholas, Nicholas. Follow me on Twitter, it's written off USA, and by way of my blog for the Huffington Post, of course, at the Huffington Post. Jerry Ashton signing off until the next 15 Minutes of Fact.